I guess we're going to start. We have about 35 attendees right now. Welcome to our first muscadine webinar this year. It's about muscadine disease management, especially in fresh market muscadines. We call it Fresh Market Muscadines, How to Keep the Fruit Clean. It's organized by the Muscadine Grape Association, and Debbie Wexler is the secretary here, and she's on the call as well. I am the host. Our research technician, Emma Folk, is our co-host. She will monitor the question and answer boxes. And then we have a couple of panelists, Phil Brannon from University of Georgia, Bill Klein from NC State University, and Irvin Lineberger from Kildare Farms in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Before we start, I would like to introduce all the panelists so that everybody knows who's here. And I would start with Emma. Emma, do you wanna introduce yourself quick?
Hi everyone, I'm Emma. Like Mark said, I'm the research technician, and I'll be making sure that if you have any questions, that they get answered. So nice to have everyone on the call.
All right. Irvin, do you want to say a word?
Yes, good morning. This is Irvin. I'm a fruit grower in the Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Have about 35 acres of fresh market muscadines, and I sell retail. Well, wholesale actually, and they go retail. But I've grown muscadine grapes since 1982.
And Bill, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, this is Bill Klein, Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology at NC State. I'm located at the research station in Castle Hayne near Wilmington. We've got about 7 acres of research plots of muscadine grapes here. Matter of fact, Phil was just spraying again this morning and last night, sort of in between the storms on one of our fungicide trials. So just put on a dry shirt a few minutes ago. Not fun weather for spraying, but we work with muscadine mostly, not so much with bunch grapes, but usually coastal plain of North Carolina, and mostly with muscadines.
All right, Debbie.
Hey, I'm Debbie Wexler. I'm Executive Secretary for the North Carolina Muscadine Association. I don't have much to add to this call, but I'm really delighted that y'all are on. And I particularly want to thank the presenters who are helping with this, and Mark, who put it together. I guess while I'm on, let me just say that this is the first of several webinars that the Muscadine Association is putting together. The next one will be on August 20th, and it's on how to operate a muscadine pick your own during COVID-19, and we'll be sending out more information about that. And then we plan to have one on making muscadine wine sometime in September. If you're not a Muscadine Grape Association member, we invite you to join, and I'll be sending something to everybody's email after the webinar.
All right, thanks, Debbie. And then Phil.
Yes, Phil Brannon with University of Georgia, Plant Pathology Department. I've had responsibility for muscadines for the last 20 years, but really started working with them in the last 2 or 3. I'm glad the Bill is on so he can correct anything I say that's wrong, so it's good to have a backup. But I'll be glad to talk to you all about diseases and tell you some of the new stuff coming down the pipeline.
All right, thanks. And then my name is Mark Hoffman, and I'm the Small Fruits Extension Specialist at the Horticulture Department at NC State. And I'm the young spring chicken here. I work with muscadines for 3 years now, so. All right, so before we start, I will go over a couple of rules for the webinar because it's kind of the first thing we do. So this is our agenda. We will have 2 presentations today. One is about a general overview, like what to do, consider when managing fresh market muscadine vineyards and disease management. That's going to be about 10 to 15 minutes. And then we have muscadine diseases and control options. That's going to be Phil's talk. And then At the end, we will have a question and answer session with the whole panel, and I will talk a little bit about how that works for you, and then also some sad news to share. Benny Bloodworth passed away in July 22nd. He was working on muscadines and I believe on blueberries in Castle Hayne, so please keep him in your thoughts and prayers tonight. He was a good addition to the muscadine industry, and he worked very close with Bill. So, Bill, do you want to say like a word to that, or do you?
I can give it a shot, Mark. I've got a lawnmower outside my window here, so you may hear some strange noises. But yes, Benny Bloodworth worked for the entomology and plant pathology department at NC State. They worked in my program for about 20 years. Many of you knew Benny, and just a lot of expertise, a lot of practical knowledge of blueberries and muscadine grapes and blackberries. And I think that the thing that always amazed me about Benny was the sort of the gift he had for extension. He loved to help growers. He was one of these folks that just would take phone calls 24/7. He'd go out and help growers after hours or on weekends. Just a real giving and helpful person, and very knowledgeable. So really going to miss Benny. But he had cancer, and after about 18 months, finally succumbed to the cancer. And he's 44 years old and leaves behind a wife and children. So keep them in your prayers. And if anyone needs more information about Benny and about his family, just email me or call me. And thank you for your concern, Mark, and for mentioning him. He's will be missed.
Yeah, no, he will be. Thank you. Thanks, Bill. All right. So now let's go a little bit over the rules of our webinar today. We will have question and answers. If you are on the internet, or if you have a web connection, there is a box down there which says Q&A, which is the question and answer box. Please write your questions into the Q&A box at any time you have them. We will try to address all questions either during or after a presentation or at the end in our question and answer session. And Emma will monitor the question, will make sure that we won't miss any. And then the pesticide credits, that we have approved pesticide credits for 1 hour here in this call. Please have your pesticide license number, name, and county ready at the end. I know you submitted already to the Muscadine Association, but we need to make sure that you're also on the call. So please have that ready by the end. If you're on the phone, you're going to have to, I'm going to unmute everyone. You're going to have to let us know your pesticide credit number. And if you're on the web, you have to put that into the chat box and not in the Q&A box. There is another box which says chat. That's where you're going to have to put at the end of our seminar your pesticide credit numbers. And then Debbie will record all that information, and that's how you will get your pesticide credits. All right, so also, I know there were a lot of questions. All the webinar recordings and presentations will be available on the CRAPE portal. There is a new tab on the CRAPE portal which says presentation and webinars. You will find all presentations from 2019 on there, and all the webinars we do and we will do in 2020 as well. And with that, if you have any questions, please let us know in the chat box. There's some questions. All right. And also all the webinar will also be posted on the North Carolina Muscadine Grape Association's website as well. So you will have two parts where you could find the webinar later. All right. With this, we're going to start. I'm going to start off with a little overview about clean fruit. Start early. Again, my name is Mark Hoffman, and this is my email address and my phone number. And I work with muscadines for 3 years now. So So why do we want to have clean fruit? I tried to find some good pictures. So this is a situation which we see a lot in vineyards, where we have a lot of disease, and where we really want to be is somewhere here. So this webinar today is going to be a lot about how to get from one point to another, how to keep our fruit clean over the picking season. Why is that important? Because berry appearance is a distinctive factor for fresh market quality, while for example, for winemaking, there are other quality factors which might be more important for wine grape production or for processing. The berry appearance is an appealing factor for a consumer and customer, and that is why we want to talk about this. It's important for your own reputation. If you produce clean fruit, it's important to increase your customer base. As Irvin said, like in one of the other conversations we had, that if the customer likes what he sees, he comes back. It might be increasing your yields because you will have less disease, and it also will, over long time, increase the standard of the fresh market muscadine industry in North Carolina as well. So this is where we want to get, and I think this is the first step today to talk about that. And we will go here in the next 10 minutes about a little bit about what are the main culprits, and I know that Phil is going to talk about that much more, so we're going to only touch base shortly on that. We'll talk about cultivars, pruning, and like a basic disease control overview. And then we will have some questions which I had in mind for Q&As later, which we probably going to answer at the end of this webinar. So those are the famous pictures which Bill took. So I'm going to show them as well. I find them in every single presentation. So the main culprits on berries for North Carolina, if we talk about pathogens, so fungal diseases, are black rot, macrophoma, ripe rot, bitter rot, and powdery mildew. And I think that is what we're going to focus on today. And you can see some of them on the right-hand side in the pictures. Other insects can be also problems, but we're not going to touch base on those today. We really focus on the big fungal diseases, which are a main problem in the North Carolina muscadine industry. And everything starts with cultivars. Generally, if you do fresh market and you sell fresh market, do not choose a cultivar with a low eating quality. Those are the cultivars which are often used for processing, such as Carlos, Noble, Doreen, or Magnolia, which are very good processing cultivars, very good winemaking quality cultivars, but they have a very low fresh market quality. And then also, as a general rule, often bronze or lighter fresh market cultivars are often more susceptible, or you see often more disease on those than on darker cultivars, especially on fry and early fry. That is the first step. Your cultivar choice is the first step. So I made a couple of lists of cultivars which are common in the industry. These are the bronze cultivars. And you can see we have Hall and Triumph, which are very common in the industry. As an early cultivar, we have Tara and Fry, and then in the late season we have Late Fry. So those are cultivars which have a better or a very good eating quality. And the same on dark cultivars. We have Lane as an early cultivar. And then we have a lot of mid-season cultivars. Supreme as a female is very commonly grown. Eisen, Black Fry, and Pork is a new cultivar from UGA. And then we have several late season cultivars, such as Nesbitt, for example, which is a self-fertile late cultivar. So those are the cultivars which are for which are common in the industry for fresh market. And there is a comprehensive list also available for cultivars in fresh market. That list can be found in the Muscadine Grape Production Guide. which is available under the Southern Small Foods Consortium homepage, as well as under the NC State homepage, and put both links in here. And we also have new hard copies, which I hopefully can get to extension agents and extension centers over the next couple of weeks. So we just got those hard copies here, and I think Phil also got a few hard copies there as well. So if we talk about clean fruit, it really starts with pruning and sanitizing a field. That's very good practice. So this is one picture where that's mid-season, and we see a lot of dead tissue on here and a lot of dead wood. That is a situation which can harbor pathogens. So it's very good practice that every time you prune, you do not want to keep your dead or diseased wood in the vineyard. You only want to keep that wood which you really need in the vineyard. And you also want to keep out old fruit and clusters on the vine. So you do not want to keep any diseased or dead tissue in your vineyard for the next season. So that's a practice which you should do every time you prune if you want to produce clean fruit. Otherwise you have a lot of inoculum. If the inoculum will build up over time in your vineyard, you will have more and more disease problems the longer you keep those old dead tissues in your vineyard. Also make sure that what we see often is that cordons and trunks do have wounds, either from frost damage or because other things that grow into the trunk. Then it's time to think about replacing those cordons, because those wounds again can be entry wounds for all sorts of pathogens which do affect your wine. Those are like typical pictures here. For example, we have an old cordon where the wire did grow into the cordon. That again can be a problem over a long time. So you want to start, and it's really hard to replace too, because once the wire is in the cordon, it's hard to get off. So, but those are situations where you might want to start thinking about replacing the cordon, as well as if you have like an old cold damage like you have here on the right-hand side. Also those might be entry wounds for pathogens, and they might affect your overall fruit quality. In those situations, if you really have a situation like this, this is what a lot of people call deep pruning. So it's a pruning approach where you really take out a lot of wood and then basically start more or less from scratch again. You do want to avoid such a situation, if possible, by every year staying on top of your pruning and get rid of old wood and wood which you don't need, rather than keeping it on the vine, because otherwise the problem is going to be bigger over time, and then you will come to a point where you will have a lot of damage, or will have a lot of dead cordon material in your vineyard, which then requires a very time-intensive pruning method. So, and we can discuss this later in the Q&A. But that's where basically your sanitizing and your clean fruit start, is with making sure that you do not keep dead wood in the vineyard when you prune. And also basic spray programs, and Phil and Bill will talk about this much more. I put that together based on the Small Foods Consortium guide. It's often good, especially if you want to keep your fruit clean, to have like an early season spray, maybe 1 or 2 applications. Often people use Mancozeb or Mansate or any EBDCs or Frag 11 product, Frag 3 product. The Frag 11s are pretty expensive, and I would keep them and use for later and not for early in the season. And also you have to make sure that your Mancozeb has a 66-day PHI. With for fresh market, you're going to have to switch earlier to like another product, because you're going to start your picking depending when your picking season starts. So that would be between bud break and bloom, and over bloom. Very similar products. You might want to switch to Captain already over bloom, and then after post bloom, especially during harvest, make sure that you look at the PHIs, because it depends really a lot on your harvest intervals. If you harvest every 14 days, you can use a lot of the Frag 11 products, but if you harvest every 10 or every 7 days, the FRAC 11 products are out of the question, as well as the FRAC 3 products are out of the question. So that is really important to understand here as well. And you find a lot of more information on the Small Fruits Consortium website, in the muscadine production IPM guide here, and this is how it looks like. It's a PDF. You can just download it, and you find a lot of information on the spray products in there. Generally, I would recommend to have a consistent spray program if you do fresh market muscadines, to keep your muscadines clean. I think it starts early with a 1 or 2 early season applications, and then you kind of have to stay on top of it over the bloom, and especially over the picking season as well. So and Irving can correct me there later, but I think that's common practice with most growers, fresh market growers who do wholesale or retail, that they have a consistent background fungicide spray program in their vineyards. There's also in the same muscadine production, in the same IPM guide, there is an overview about which fungicide to use, what the PHIs are, and which pathogen they work for. And to give you some food for thought for the later Q&A, the spray equipment is very important in muscadines, because as you can see here in this picture, if you spray like this, you're going to hit everything but not the grapes. And especially in muscadine, it's very important because the fruit zone, there is no real established fruit zone, and most of the fruits are behind the canopy, as you can see here. And that's how usually muscadine vineyard looks like. So it's really important to get basically under the canopy to the fruit, to where the fruit are, and not spray the canopy if you do a targeted fruit spray. So that's something we can discuss later. There are a couple of methods how they might work. It's usually Air Plus sprayers which have a targeted spray bomb, which basically can reach under the canopy to hit the fruit target, to hit the fruit. So that's something we should be able to discuss. And then another question came up when I talked yesterday to a grower on the phone, especially about fungicide resistance and any knowledge on fungicide resistance for ripe rot, which is called Tocotrium cleosporidis, and or powdery mildew, which is known to have fungicide resistance as well. So those are two thoughts for food later for the Q&A. So with this, we look at our Q&A questions. And then there was one question about COVID restrictions. So we will have, from Andy Seaman, so we will have a special webinar on COVID for Pick Your Owns on August 20th, as Debbie said before. So we will have food safety specialists on that webinar, and that's going to be August 20th at 4 p.m. That's when our COVID webinar will be. And then another question was recommended sprays for organic muscadine disease control. So I would give that question to either Bill or Phil, or whoever wants to answer anything about organic muscadine disease control. I don't have any experience with organics. So does any of you have?
The short answer from me is no. I don't have any experience with organic muscadines. I'd say that in general, muscadines are one of the few commodities that are fruit commodity in the Southeast that can lend themselves to organic production, because just the nature of the beast. They don't have that many diseases, and especially in a dry year, you can still get a pretty good yield with that. In general, with organic production, you're highly limited, and you've got sulfurs and coppers, and my experience with those on muscadines is nil. Bill may have some information as far as when he sprayed those before in the past. Either one of those can have potential to cause damage on some grape varieties. I don't know about muscadine, though. I've never heard anything negative about it, but you're pretty much limited there. And then you do have some organic materials, some biologicals and things like that you could spray potentially that may have activity on some of the rots, in addition to the sulfur for the powdery mildew mainly. That's what you're going to get with the sulfur for the most part. And then the copper may help with some of the rots as well, but that would be it. But again, my disclaimer is I don't know anything about damage with those two products. I know on vinifera grapes, either one of them can cause some damage. Bill, do you know anything about it?
Yeah, we've used sulfur pretty routinely, and I've got growers who are only worried about powdery mildew, and they'll just use sulfur, and no problem really on the muscadines as far as injury. So I think sulfur is the big go-to, and powdery mildew would be the big problem that you're dealing with sulfur. And powdery mildew can be quite severe on muscadine. So if I were growing muscadines organically, I'd be applying sulfur for powdery. As far as other fruit rots, we do have a copper in a fungicide trial this year. So far, I haven't seen any injury from it, but don't know yet just how effective it's going to be. There's just not a lot of good fungicides out there for any small fruit crops that are organic fungicides. So we're really lacking there. The other point I would make about organic muscadine production is I would really lean heavily toward the dark fruited muscadines, because the bronze muscadines are going to be the ones that have more fruit rots. When we do a fruit rot fungicide trial, we don't even try to do it on black fruited muscadines because they just don't get a lot of fruit rot. So the bronze skinned ones are going to be the ones that have a problem, and those are the ones to avoid if you're an organic grower.
Yeah, that's a good point. Irvin, do you?
Mill stop. I saw a question pop up about mill stop,
Yeah.
and again, I don't know. I've not looked at it. Probably not as effective as sulfur, if I had to guess. A lot of those products, like mill stop, are more flash in the pan type products. They don't stay around very long. So if you're looking at powdery mildew, which is what the question was about, I'd still, if it doesn't cause damage, and again, that's the critical question, then sulfur would be my go-to product for organic on muscadine, probably, I think, still.
All right. Irvin, do you have any recommendation? Do you have like a different spray program for dark cultivars versus bronze cultivars, or do you treat everything the same?
Pretty much treat everything the same, because we interplant so much for pollination. We just treat all black or bronze with the same spray program. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you, Irvin.
Okay.
And then the last question was, what comments do we have on hedging the wines this time of the year? Irvin, do you want to say something about the hedging?
Yes, we're in the process of hedging now. We try to hedge the outer bands at about knee high. We found if we go higher than that, we're losing some leaf surface that we probably need for sugar production. If we go lower than that, then we may have to come back again. But we need that air circulation underneath the canopy, especially during high humidity times, and we need to get the spray up under there too. But this is about the right time to do hedging, I think.
Yeah, I would concur with that.
And you mentioned the airflow, Irvin. The other thing is weed management, and that would be organic or non-organic, making sure that you have a good airflow by making sure that you don't have weeds growing up into the vines. And I've sometimes seen that muscadines will forgive you for a lot of things, but that would be something else that would really be a problem for diseases, because you just don't have an airflow and everything dries off very slowly. So making sure your weed management is good. You have a weed-free strip underneath, and then it's well mowed in the row middles is very important.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I've seen vignettes where the weed management wasn't great, and that often increases the disease pressure. So that's a good point. Yeah.
Just to comment on the hedging, I will say we hedge a lot higher at the research station in Castle Hayne, just for research purposes, just for ease of harvest and observation. So we're cutting that, and what we're talking about with hedging, some people call skirting, where you basically mow underneath the cordon to cut off this curtain of vine that's hanging down. And we'll go probably waist high or a little higher, Irvin, just so we can see the grapes and do our evaluations without having to get down on our knees to look at them. But if you do cut too high with that skirting or hedging cut, you really will stress the vine, I think, and really hurt the sugar production in the fruit. We've also found that you can that Carlos and Noble, the processing varieties, are a lot more forgiving because they're so much more vigorous, and you can pretty well cut them any height you want as far as the hedging cut. But when you get over into the fresh market cultivars, you really have to be careful not to stress them with the hedging cut.
So that answers Deborah's question as well. So Irvin is hedging them knee high. That's what he said, and then I think Bill is doing it a little bit higher. But again, with the fresh market cultivars, you're going to have to be careful. All right, so we're going to have to move on to the next talk. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll give it to Phil.
Okay, let me see if I can find my screen that I want to have here. Well, I'm looking. Give me a second here. I got to find my presentation. It seems to have gone away. So let me see if I can go back and actually find that before I get too far removed. So important. All right, here it is. I hope. All right, do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right, just making sure. All right, so I'm going to be talking to you about disease management, and Mark's covered some of this as well, and so we'll move through this pretty quick. But I do want to say that, of course, muscadines do have diseases, and they're not foolproof. We talked about the fact that you can do an organic program in muscadines, and I think that is true because a lot of people do that inherently. A lot of homeowners never spray, and you still have a pretty good production of muscadine. Mark's already mentioned our guide. So if you go to the smallfruits.org website, we do have information in that guide on muscadines, and it covers pretty much every aspect of integrated pest management, including insects and weeds as well as diseases. And so that's a good source for you. Another thing Mark's mentioned too is this guide that he's put together, which is also actually located at the same site. So if you go to the IPM guide site on the smallfruits.org website, this additional horticultural or viticultural guide that Mark's put together is there, and most of us have worked on that as well. So it's a good resource for you. Something we're going to do this fall, and Mark will be involved in this, probably Bill, I'll pull him in on this also, but we're going to do a kind of a spray poster or kind of a disease poster along with all the insects as well to tell you when you need to be concerned about these particular pathogens. And this will be similar to this viticulture management guide we've worked on for vinifera grapes. And so we'll do that for muscadine. So y'all can expect to see that coming in the near future. Something you can put in your barn or somewhere. It may help you to think through some stuff, may help your workers to look for some things in the field as well. So it should be a good resource for you. It's something you can hang up. As far as the diseases, again, Mark had covered this, but these are the big ones. You have bitter rot, ripe rot, macrophoma, black rot, powdery mildew, and angular leaf spot. And so those are the big ones. Now, that's a lot of diseases, but when you compare it to our vinifera grapes, they're not nearly as aggressive most years as far as what we'd see on vinifera or even some of our hybrids. So muscadines have a lot of built-in resistance. Sometimes our breeding programs take out some of the resistance, though. But for the most part, our people are always looking for diseases and trying to breed something that does actually incorporate some resistance in there. And I've already said this, if you were to go to our farm right now, at a horticulture farm that's nearby, we have muscadine side by side with some vinifera type grapes and some other hybrids. The vinifera grapes are getting hammered with disease right now. We got downy mildew and powdery mildew and all kinds of rots going on. From the standpoint of pathology, it's very exciting. You walk right next door into our muscadines. These are newly planted within the last 2 or 3 years. They haven't had a lot of buildup, so there's actually what I call kind of a honeymoon period for a lot of things, and muscadines are a good example of that because the diseases have to build up over time. We are seeing a little bit of black rot on the leaves, but otherwise they're perfectly clean. Now we'll see how that proceeds into the fall, but they're lovely fruit, and we don't see any disease on them at all. And again, you look at vinifera, they're just covered up. So but muscadines can get disease, especially in a wet year. Dry years, you could probably get by with a very limited, if not a no spray program in some cases. But when it's wet, you're going to get disease. This has already been mentioned. Look at some of the stuff that Benny had done with Bill years ago. But if you're looking at the spray program this time on a Carlos variety, you can see how much of an impact spraying can have on the different diseases. So on a susceptible variety, it's very necessary to spray. You're going to get a tremendous amount of fruit by comparison to where you don't spray, and spray well, and use all the integrated management practices you can think about. Weed control, making sure you clear out under the vine so you have good airflow, all those things combined, good spray penetration because of that as well. That's going to help you out. And Bill had mentioned this a while ago, but when you look at some of these darker varieties versus the bronze, you can see there's just a tremendous difference in disease, just looking at Noble versus Carlos as an example of that, and that's on an unsprayed program. And so when you look at that, you can say, well, that's something you need to consider. So looking at the varieties you're planting is probably going to be as important, if not more important, than any other thing you can do. You got to do everything you can up front, and variety is part of it. The cultural practices, making sure you have good airflow, good spray penetration, that's all very, very important. Okay, let's talk about the diseases. Again, angular leaf spot's one that you can have that's going to be a very much limited, more so to muscadine than anything else. It's something we have to be concerned about every year, especially in a wet year. It will defoliate the vine, and so that's not good. As I try to tell my students, if they're out in the field, plants do not do well without leaves. So that's a take-home point. They don't do well without leaves. So if you lose your leaves, you're going to have all kinds of problems. And they may die from it, obviously. Cold damage is one thing that will take them out if you've lost all your leaves. Mancozeb and Captan do a pretty good job. And so we're used to using those kind of as the backbone of our muscadine program, and I'll say they still are. You spray Mancozeb as long as you possibly can, then switch over to Captan as far as your contact type protectant materials that are not systemic. So they're going to get washed off in the rain, but they generally don't develop very much resistance that we know of. I'll scare you a little bit. There's a report out of Florida this year from a respected researcher down there, and it's a report on particularly on Polytotricum and resistance development. And we sprayed a lot of Mancozeb in a lot of different commodities, but what they're saying is they're starting to see some resistance developing to Mancozeb, and there's a way that could happen. The only reason I bring that up is we're going to use those materials as the backbone of our program, but we definitely need to incorporate other materials into our program just to make sure we don't get resistance to those. I think it's unlikely that's going to happen, but I did want to bring that up while we're talking about it because that's new information. And then these applications are basically made starting at pre-bloom, bud break, and then you're going to continue on a 14-day schedule at least into late August in Georgia. I don't know if that'll be similar in North Carolina or not, but probably about the same. Yeah, bitter rot. Again, the infection occurs at the shoot extension during or shortly after bloom. In the pedicel, it's a latent infection. This one will probably come up more as you get the sugar comes up. Any tissue can be invaded, but mature ripened fruit is most susceptible to this disease. So that's when you're going to see it. And late season bloom through harvest sprays are very important for this as well. So that's another disease where you have to basically spray season long to make sure you control it. Macrophoma rot, very important disease that we also see quite frequently. Actually, probably need to go back and review the literature on what it's called now. Everything, they change names on this stuff all the time. But it used to be called macrophoma, then it was with fusicoccum, and it may be called something different now. We don't know a lot about the epidemiology still. We need to do more research on muscadine diseases in order to figure that kind of stuff out. But we do know it can be controlled with applications from bloom till harvest. So that's the key, is making sure we get good materials out there to take care of it. Ripe rot, which is glomerella or collototricum. This is one very aggressive. It can affect at any stage. We are concerned about resistance to it. It's something we probably need to be checking for to see if we're developing resistance to it. We're developing resistance to this category of organisms in just about every other fruit. And so it would not surprise me when we sprayed, especially the strobilurin materials, for a long period of time. It would not surprise me if we had resistance. And so if you're seeing a failure or what you consider to be a failure of control with this particular organism, it's something we need to check out. We do have a clinic down in South Georgia that can test for resistance. And if you get into a situation where you need that, you can talk to Mark. We can figure out how to get samples down there and find out whether or not you have it or not. At this stage, it may still be free. If it's not, if the money hasn't run out, the Small Fruit Consortium has given us the money to do testing. If not, you may have to pay for it, but we can talk about that later. Again, these rots don't show up, even though the infection could have occurred earlier. As the sugars come up in the fruit, that's when you actually see these rots. So when you see it at the end, it doesn't mean that it just happened. It could have happened very early in the season, but you're now starting to see that. And that's true for a lot of these rots. And again, if we don't have resistance, we're going to control this. The mancozeb and captan do have activity on this category of organisms. But again, we want to make sure that we don't overuse those even, because that's the category of organisms that resistance has been seen in mancozeb. Black rot, again, a very critical disease. It's a major problem in bunch grapes, and it can be a problem in muscadines also. Again, this mancozeb or manab captan backbone program that I talk about is going to do a lot to control that. That's going to be a critical one to control. Early season applications are very critical. And let me make that statement again. If you can control early season on a lot of these diseases, that's a lot of the battle. A lot of what we're seeing later in the season is due to poor control early in the season. So you've got to really front load your spray program and try to control diseases well early in the season. And then later in the season, to some degree, you may have less problems. That's what we're looking for. Bill's mentioned powdery mildew. Again, it can be a problem with muscadines. And so it does attack every part of the plant potentially. Mainly causes a lot of rusting and cracking, and then you get rots in on top of that. And so that's going to be a problem for you. And in addition to the aesthetics on the fruit, you can also have fruit drop and reduce fruit size. So very important disease. You look at our spray programs, we haven't changed a lot in the last 20 years since I've been here. And we all say about the same thing. This is from Mississippi. You look at this as an older spray program, but it's got mancozeb, captan. Nova used to be the product, but it's now Rally. then Abound. So there's a strobilurin thrown in there. You got a DMI thrown in there, Mancozeb and Captan. That's what we've concentrated on. So that's from Mississippi. This is Bill's program from years ago. I've thrown that slide in here. Y'all probably seen it before. But again, very similar. We're looking at Nova and Captan, Abound, Pristine, or Flint. Those are all in that strobilurin category. It's one additional category. You got DMIs, you got the strobilurins, and then you got Captan and Mancozeb as our backbone products. That's coming out of North Carolina. Barbara Smith has done a good bit of research in Mississippi. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but it's basically the same as far as the products that she's recommending. And I haven't seen anything new coming from her in years on this. But the one thing that she had said, and I'm not going to show you the data, keep this short, but she said you could stop spraying 2 months before harvest. I think what I'd say on that is that I don't agree with that. I would not do that. But I think based on her research and where she has shown that, what you can understand from that is, again, front loading your spray program with good materials up front is going to be very important. What she has shown is, at least in her research, that the latter sprays are not as important as the earlier sprays. And so I just want to make that as an emphasis point. Those early sprays through the first half of the season in particular are going to be critical to disease control. And what she's saying is the later sprays, though you might need them, is what I'm saying, they may not be as critical. Where she has cut those out, she's actually had pretty good disease control. But the front ones are very important. When you look at some of the information on when the diseases are coming in, and this is kind of information we're going to try to put in these charts, the reason I'd say that I don't necessarily agree with that, it may be that we don't know enough about these diseases. But if you look at some of these diseases in particular, they are actually, at least what we know about them says that they can come in and infect all the way up to a harvest. Look at ripe rot, the Choletotrichum glomerella disease in particular, and I think that's probably true because we see that in every other commodity I work with, that there is not a timing in which it cannot infect. But again, I would suspect that early season applications of materials that will control that and front loading that will help you to have less disease. And some of these other diseases are like that as well. I don't think you can say they don't continue to infect throughout the season, but early season infections are going to be critical, and you're just going to have less secondary infection. Once you start having disease, the spores are going to be out there in your vineyard, and they're going to continue to move and splash and go on to other grapes. So if you can stop the epidemic early, just like the COVID virus, you know, with the lower amount of disease you have in a population, the less you're going to have. The same thing is true with any of these fungal diseases as well. It works about the same. We have efficacy charts in our guide, but what you're going to see in the next year, I hope, Bill and I are doing a lot of testing of new categories of chemicals. We'll try to figure out where they fit from the standpoint of disease control if we have enough disease in our vineyards this year, and that would help us out to tell you where they fit. We can somewhat extrapolate from other commodities where we think they would fit, but it'd be nice to have disease efficacy data. But there are several other categories, especially the SDHIs, that's the succinase dehydrogenase inhibitor category, that we have quite a few products we could put into this guide. But we also want to make sure we don't take all the leaves off or cause damage to the fruit. So we will have that information for sure. As of right now, I have not seen any problems with, we've got, I think there are somewhere between 10 to 15 chemicals that we're spraying right now on muscadines, and I've not seen any indication of any kind of phytotoxicity or damage to the vine or to the fruit. If that continues, you should see quite a few new chemicals next year we'll put in the guide that you can use. Hopefully that'll help you out. It gives us different categories that should help with resistance management and hopefully for control. Nematodes and crown gall, we've not ever worried a lot about nematodes, and I've said before, I've not seen a lot of crown gall. Everything changes though as we go forward. We have done a little bit of survey work now looking at nematodes. We do know that there are quite a few nematodes that build up to high populations in muscadines. The work we've done with that, we do say at the end of this that we don't have any idea whether that means anything. In other words, you could have probably a pretty high population of nematodes on a muscadine that may do just fine. However, we don't know what would happen in a replant scenario. So that's the next stage of this. If you're going back in and putting little baby muscadines where you've had muscadines before, are those nematodes going to jump on there and have some kind of long-term impact? And that's something we need to think about. So I would say that when I'm replanting, in particular muscadines, I would at least get nematode samples based on the research we've done now, where we know that there are some pretty heavy populations of nematodes in muscadines. That would be nice to know that, and then we'd have to think about what you do next. As far as crown gall, I've seen more crown gall in the last year or two on muscadines, but that's mainly because of the movement of muscadines into northern regions. And so we're seeing more muscadines grown in North Georgia, for example. We get a lot more cold damage, and that's where we're seeing a lot of crown gall. So we've had significant crown gall now in those areas where we have cold damage. As we see the vines get older, they generally seem to be more resistant to crown gall. But the young vines in particular are getting more cold damage and then more crown gall. We mentioned the pruning cuts and trying to get rid of some of this diseased tissue. That's a very important thing. You have Bacterosphaera that can come in on old pruning cuts, and then eventually if the vine is stressed, it'll go down and can kill the whole vine. So that's an important thing for us to contend with and get out of there. The thing that you want to do for that is, as far as we know, the best recommendation we have right now is on the day you prune, go out and put some Topsin-M or Rally, probably two applications. One of Topsin-M first is what I'd recommend, and then Rally, that gives you two different modes of action for resistance management, and put that actually out on those pruning cuts. Now, you got to apply it directly to the pruning cuts. Doing that with an air blast sprayer, you can do that, but you're going to waste a lot of spray. But it's a good opportunity to prevent some of these dieback diseases from going in. And then if you do see it, you want to go ahead and take out the dead arm or dieback as quickly as possible to keep it from moving down the trunk. And so we have seen that as an issue for us on muscadines. It does occur periodically, and that's what you do about that. Post-harvest disease control, I've said this before in past presentations. We don't have a lot of information on that. There's not been a lot of work done on it for muscadines, but generally we do know we want to keep them cold. Quicker you can get the field heat out of them and keep them cool, the better they're going to get to market. So that's an easy thing. There's some recommendations here as far as how to do that. These are some of the organisms that can impact post-harvest. There are quite a few of those. Some of those occur in the field, but then some of them are things you don't see in the field, but they're just storage rots. We do know that torn stem scars, and again, that's a breeding thing. If you can have muscadines that don't have the stem scars on there, make sure your varieties you put out don't have torn stem scars, then you're going to have less problems with these post-harvest diseases as well. And as far as other types of research to treat for post-harvest diseases, there's virtually nothing out there that has been done with muscadines. So again, the critical things are cold temperatures, get into the market under cold conditions, and then the torn stem scars, making sure you pick varieties that don't do that, and getting them there at an optimal time. You don't want to overripe muscadine because that's also going to have more problems in storage as well. And that is it. That is what I have as far as disease. So that's a quick review. I know that I'm glad that Mark's going to have that out there available for you, so you can go back and look at that again and actually see some of those slides. But that gives you just basically the overview of what you have to contend with, and that's what I have.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Philip. So we will be going about 10 minutes over time today. There's one question, the Q&A. Everyone who is on the chat could start putting in their pesticide license number in the chat box, and Debbie can record those. That would be very helpful for us. And we're going to answer a couple of questions, and I have a few questions as well for the panel. So there was one question that in the Q&A box about crown gall, and Phil, you talked about this a little bit. It says, how do you prevent and manage crown gall? So we see quite a bit more crown gall here in North Carolina, at least since I'm here. Bill can probably talk to that more because I'm here for 3 years and I saw my fair share of crown gall in muscadines already.
Well, I guess one of the things too, I'd ask you, when you're seeing it, is it on young vines versus older vines? Because if you're planting younger vines, we're seeing a lot more of it in the North Georgia area now. I've never seen a lot of crown rot. Are you saying crown rot or crown gall?
Crown gall, and I think they're
crown gall. A lot of crown gall. I'm not seeing a lot of crown gall in South Georgia, but I'm seeing a good bit in the northern area, and y'all probably fall more in the northern area than we would in South Georgia, obviously. And so I think we've seen more cold damage the last few years.
Yeah, I
Part of
think
that may be related to the fact that we have these warm periods, and then all of a sudden we have this real cold front that comes through, and so we don't seem to have. We're not going into the winter or staying dormant in the winter like we used to. So I think that's more of a problem for it to do. But anyway, Bill, do you have comments on that?
Well, I think you can see galling or callousing as a wound response in muscadines, even in the absence of the crown gall bacterium. So my first comment would be, if you see galling on a muscadine, it's not always crown gall. And so that's something that's a sort of a big open question for us. I also remember reading some of the older literature that a lot of muscadine vines from nursery have a crown gall, a muscadine version of the crown gall bacterium in them. So a lot of plants come from nurseries not as clean stock. So there's potential for crown gall to develop when you have a plant like that when you have cold injury. So I think some of the vines have this crown gall bacterium already present in the vine, and they're just waiting for an injury for the gall to appear. With other small fruit crops, I have generally told people, when you see crown gall, get rid of the plant. That's not what I've told people with muscadines. And I think muscadines tolerate crown gall better than other small fruits. Just some practical advice, that I've given folks over the years. As far as preventing it, I think the way you should think about it on muscadines is managing cold damage to the vines when they're young, first 2 or 3 years. If you can avoid wounding from herbicides or from cold damage in the first few years, I think you really get past a lot of the crown gall problems on muscadines.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing as well. We don't, as far as I know, nobody that's producing muscadines is actually heat treating those vines, and I don't even know how you would do that for sure. I mean, I don't know what the specification would be. Now, if you look at vinifera grapes, a lot of them are heat treated. And so they actually put them in a hot water bath and keep them there for a period of time. And that helps to at least alleviate some of the crown gall bacterium in the vines. But in muscadines, as far as I know, that's not done. The theory behind it is that the bacteria is there, and once you have an injury, that's when the bacteria produces the gall. And so I assume the same thing is true in muscadines as would be in the vinifera vine as well. But what you've said makes perfectly good sense. And I'd say that that's what we're seeing also. It's a problem mainly in young vines, and again, mainly in areas where you get cold damage.
I think Irvin can concur to that actually too. So we have another question here. Any experience on crop expectations based on primary, secondary, and tertiary buds in muscadines? And my feeling is that there will be not a big difference between the primary and secondary bud breaking in terms of crop levels. So it's not like in the vinifera grape where you have secondary buds usually much less fruitful than primary buds. But Bill and Irvin, do you know anything about that?
No, I'm not sure that I could recognize the secondary bud off of a muscadine.
Yeah, I agree.
While the vinifera grape is much easier to see.
Yeah. I don't think there's a big difference between the fruit levels in muscadines between
Right.
the buds. And that's not in my experience.
I think on muscadines we have to distinguish, you know, sort of what we're talking about. You know, with the bunch grapes, you have these, you have the buds that are present. You may lose the first one, but you get the next bud breaking, and they're basically all in the same area of the vine. It's sort of a little cluster of buds all together, and well, if you lose one, you may get another. With the muscadines, what we'll often see is an entire new flush of growth further out on the vines. And so sometimes you can have this sort of second flush, and it will bloom late and produce fruit late, and you'll sort of have a split crop. But it's not a latent bud that emerged in response to injury. You know, sometimes it's in response to a short crop, to my mind, you know, to poor pollination or to a mow cut that's made too early. You'll get a flush and then get this crop of green berries that's out there present at harvest. And you know, sometimes they'll ripen before frost, and sometimes not. So muscadines are sort of a different creature there as far as primary, secondary, tertiary buds go. I agree with Irvin. I don't think you see them with muscadines. I think you just see entire new flushes of growth that start later.
Yeah.
Yep. And we're seeing a lot of that this year
because of the frost. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have like two other questions, and then I think we're good today. And that's the first question is I would like to pick Irvin's brain on the spray equipment, and I think I talked about this a little bit earlier today. So I hear some people saying that you before harvest and then during harvest you want to target the fruit zone. Is that what you guys do on your farm?
I didn't understand the question. What was it?
So do you guys target the fruit zone with your AirPlus sprayers?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We use air blast sprayers and we adjust the nozzles so that they are targeted to the growth area.
Mm-hmm.
And we start with that even before a bud break, and so we're able to save some of the product that way.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay.
Where we have maybe 5 or 6 on each side of the sprayer, we're usually no more than 3 targeted to a certain area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then what would you recommend to a grower who wants to start spraying now? Let's say he saw that webinar and said, you know what, I need to do something about it. So what would you recommend to that person?
You mean at this time of the year?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think it's too late.
Yeah.
I would be very hesitant to go in with any kind of fungicide or insecticide within 2 weeks of harvest.
Yep.
And one thing I wanted to mention, I agree with everything that Phil and Bill said about fungicides. But Captan has a low PHI, pre-harvest interval, but it has a residue that you want to avoid if you're marketing fresh market. People do not want to see unsightly residue on their fruit, even though it's safe. Captan is one that will show up quite a bit, even though it's legal to spray. You don't want to spray that. I wouldn't think within 30 days of harvest. The problem is that fruit is underneath the canopy. When you get rain, the canopy sheds the water, so it doesn't wash off, especially if you put it in there with an air blast sprayer.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right. Thanks, Irvin.
Yeah, one more point on that too. I think Irvin makes a critical point on the residue. But I would say when you're looking at sprayers, y'all ought to be putting out these water-sensitive cards under your canopy and in your canopy, making sure that you're getting good coverage. Make sure you're calibrated well and do that. I think it's a very helpful exercise because you don't know. I've told people before, you can look at an air blast sprayer and you think you're getting good coverage. you do not know at all unless you go out there with water sensitive cars, because you just can't tell. It looks good,
Yeah.
but it may not be good.
Yeah. Mark, there's one other thing I want to mention about the fungicides. We haven't mentioned lime sulfur or sulfurex as a product today, but I think that it's really important to use that during the dormant period to sanitize the vineyard. After leaf drop and after the fruit drop and possibly after pruning or maybe even before pruning, that is a good sanitizer. And it's not really expensive, but it does the job on a lot of different things.
And I agree with that too. It is in our guide. It's one of our recommendations as well. I didn't mention that, but I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, I agree with you too. Sorry, I didn't mention it too, but yeah, I completely agree. And then one more question, and then we're gonna, so I think somebody couldn't understand what you said, water sensitive, what? It's the question.
Water sensitive cards. So these are cards, C-A-R-D-S, to make it very clear. And so basically you can take those and use some clips and put them in the canopy before you spray water going through, and you can do that at different stages through the season. And it will tell you whether or not you're getting good coverage, because if those cards are not covered well with the right size droplets when you go through at different areas in your canopy, you will know that you're not getting good coverage. So you can adjust either your volume of the water you're putting out, the total spray volume. You may have to adjust pressure. There are different things you can adjust to get better coverage. Maybe open up more nozzles, depending on what the situation is. Maybe change the nozzles. Sometimes your nozzles are old. Sometimes you have clogged nozzles. You don't realize you're not getting full coverage, but that's what you can do with a water sensitive card.
And you want to put those actually into the zone which you target. So let's say you target the fruit and you want to put that into the fruit zone.
Yeah, I would put them throughout at different points on the outside of the canopy, inside of the canopy. But again, where you're right, if you're targeting the fruit zone, you've got to put them with the fruit and make sure that you're getting good coverage throughout the entire area. We have done these as demonstrations before, where you go in and put those out. And it's amazing how poor the coverage can be. People are not aware of it. Again, you can't look at a sprayer and tell that you're getting good coverage. You just can't do it.
All right, I think that's it. The two people who are on the phone with us at the moment, please stay on the phone. Irvin, not you, you're good. Unless you want to give us your pesticide license number.
No, I don't.
Yeah, okay, so then we have one more person on the phone. Please stay with us, and Debbie, please stay on, and we record your license number as well. And then everybody else, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Which means we're done now.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Bill.
For putting this together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.